I am Cassandra, 34 years old, and I never thought my own father would slap me in front of 88 people at his 60th birthday party. The sound echoed through the room as my sister Amanda cheered and clapped. Years of family tension exploded in that moment, leaving me humiliated and broken. But sometimes the quietest actions speak the loudest. One phone call changed everything. Before I share my story, let me know where you are watching from. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been betrayed by those who should love you most. Family wounds cut deepest, but healing is possible. When most people look at my life from the outside, they see success. I live in a beautiful brownstone in Boston, work as a senior financial analyst at a prestigious firm, and drive a luxury car that I worked hard to afford. What they do not see are the family wounds that never properly healed. Growing up as the firstborn daughter of Robert and Sarah Wilson meant carrying the weight of expectations. My father built his construction business from nothing, working 16-hour days and expecting nothing less than perfection from his family. My mother, a former beauty queen turned socialite, was obsessed with appearances and social standing. For the first 8 years of my life, I was their pride and joy, the perfect daughter who excelled at everything from academics to piano recitals. Everything changed when Amanda was born. Suddenly, I was no longer the center of attention. Amanda was the cute baby with curly blonde hair and big blue eyes, while I had inherited my father's more serious features and my grandmother's auburn hair. It seemed like overnight I went from being our special girl to the responsible one who should know better. As we grew older, the divide deepened. Amanda could do no wrong in my parents' eyes. When she broke my science project the night before the fair, it was just an accident. When she took my prom dress without asking and returned it with wine stains, it was because sisters share. When she crashed my car in high school and left me to deal with the insurance, my parents gave her money for a new outfit to cheer her up. Despite this, I worked hard to make my own way. I earned scholarships, graduated at the top of my class, and secured a job that allowed me financial independence. I met Thomas during my second year at the firm. He was a corporate attorney with kind eyes and a gentle spirit who made me feel valued in ways my family never had. We married 3 years later in a small ceremony that my parents criticized for not being grand enough. The greatest source of tension emerged when Thomas and I discovered I had endometriosis, a condition that made it extremely difficult for me to conceive. After 2 painful miscarriages and countless treatments, we accepted that biological children might not be in our future. My mother called it quitting, while my father suggested Thomas find a real woman who could give him sons. Amanda, always eager to twist the knife, began referring to me as the barren branch of the family tree at holiday gatherings. We gradually reduced contact with my family. The occasional phone call, a brief visit during holidays, and eventually just Christmas cards. Thomas and I built our own version of family with close friends, fulfilling careers, and discussions about adoption when we were ready. I thought I had made peace with the distance between my birth family and me. Then came the invitation to my father's 60th birthday party. A formal card with gold embossing arrived in the mail, personally addressed to me, not to Mr. and Mrs. Thomas Lambert. There was a handwritten note from my father. It would mean a lot to have both my girls there. After 8 years of minimal contact, this small gesture rekindled a hope I thought had died long ago. Maybe he was finally ready to reconcile. Maybe turning 60 had made him reflect on our relationship. Thomas was scheduled to be in London for an important case during the party, but he encouraged me to go. Maybe this is their way of extending an olive branch, he said, always the optimist. You have nothing to lose by trying one more time. I spent weeks preparing for this reunion. I found a beautiful dress that made me feel confident. I searched antique shops until I found the perfect gift, a vintage pocket watch similar to one my grandfather had owned, which my father had always admired. I even practiced responses to potential uncomfortable questions about my childless marriage or my long absence from family events. The night before the party, I called my old friend Jessica, who had remained in my hometown and occasionally saw my parents at community events. Be careful, Cass, she warned. I've heard Amanda and Eric are having money troubles. They moved in with your parents last month. I dismissed her concerns. Surely my father's gesture was genuine. People change, especially as they age and face their mortality. I packed my overnight bag with hopeful anticipation, ignoring the knot of anxiety in my stomach. After all, what could possibly go wrong at a public celebration? With 88 guests present, my father would hardly make a scene in front of his business associates and friends. As I drove the 3 hours to my childhood home, memories flooded back. The treehouse my father built when I was 6. The kitchen where my mother taught me to bake cookies before she became too concerned about maintaining her figure. The backyard where Amanda and I had occasionally played together before competition replaced sisterhood. I wanted to believe that somewhere beneath the years of hurt and misunderstanding, we were still a family. That blood would ultimately prove thicker than water. That the parents who had once loved me so fiercely could find that love again. That my sister and I could discover common ground as adults that had eluded us as children. The elegant hotel where the party was being held came into view. I parked my car, checked my makeup one last time, and stepped out into the cool evening air, clutching my carefully wrapped gift and a heart full of cautious hope. The Regency Hotel ballroom had been transformed into an elegant space worthy of a magazine spread. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over tables adorned with elaborate floral arrangements. A string quartet played softly in the corner. A large banner reading "Happy 60th Birthday, Robert" hung over a table displaying photos from different stages of my father's life. I noticed that pictures including me were conspicuously absent. My mother spotted me first. Sarah Wilson still maintained the beauty that had won her pageant crowns in her youth, though now with the help of expensive procedures and religiously followed skincare routines. Her smile tightened when she saw me not quite reaching her eyes. "Cassandra, you actually came." She air-kissed near my cheeks, careful not to smudge her makeup. "Where is Thomas? Too busy for family again?" "He sends his regrets. He has an important case in London," I explained, trying to maintain my composure. "He really wanted to be here." Convenient," she replied, her tone making it clear she didn't believe me. "Your father is over there with the Johnsons. You should say hello." I made my way through the crowd, nodding at familiar faces and introducing myself to those I didn't recognize. Several people did double takes when they heard my name, as if they couldn't believe I was actually there. One elderly woman grabbed my arm and whispered, "So brave of you to show your face after everything." Before I could ask what she meant, I spotted my father. Robert Wilson commanded attention in any room, and tonight was no exception. At 60, his once dark hair was now silver, but he stood tall and proud in his tailored suit, gesturing animatedly, as he told a story to an attentive group. When he saw me approaching, he paused mid-sentence. Something flashed in his eyes, but I couldn't read it before he smoothed his expression into a polite smile. "Cassandra, you made it." No hug, no warmth, just a firm handshake as if I were a business associate rather than his daughter. "Happy birthday, Dad. I wouldn't miss it," I replied, handing him the carefully wrapped package. "This is for you." He took it with a nod, but made no move to open it. "You can put it with the others," he said, gesturing to a table piled with gifts. "Amanda and Eric just arrived. You should say hello to your sister." I turned to see Amanda making a grand entrance on the arm of her husband. At 26, my sister had blossomed into a stunning woman who knew exactly how to use her beauty to her advantage. Her blonde hair was expertly styled, her designer dress clearly new and expensive. Eric, tall and handsome, but with a perpetually worried expression, followed slightly behind her like a shadow. Amanda's smile froze when she saw me. She whispered something to Eric before plastering on a bright expression and sweeping toward me. "My big sister finally decided to grace us with her presence," she exclaimed loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. "What a surprise! We figured you were too busy with your important job and perfect life to bother with family anymore." I forced a smile. "It's good to see you too, Amanda. Eric, how are you?" Eric looked uncomfortable. "Fine, thanks. Good to see you, Cassandra." "So where's Thomas?" Amanda asked, glancing around dramatically. "Don't tell me he's working again. Or is there trouble in paradise?" "He's in London on business. He sends his congratulations to Dad." Amanda raised an eyebrow. "Business. Right. That's what they all say. Before I could respond, a cousin I hadn't seen in years approached. Cassandra, I didn't expect to see you here. How's the child-free life treating you? Still, no luck in that department. I felt heat rise to my cheeks. Thomas and I are very happy with our life as it is. Of course you are, the cousin replied with false sympathy. Not everyone is meant to be a mother. Some women just don't have that nurturing instinct, right, Amanda? Amanda smiled sweetly. Some women prioritize other things, like Cassandra with her career. Though I always thought she'd make time for family eventually. Guess some people just aren't family-oriented. I excused myself to get a drink, needing a moment to compose myself. At the bar, I encountered Jessica, my childhood friend who had warned me about Amanda's financial situation. You came, she said, giving me a genuine hug. How's it going so far? About as well as expected, I admitted. Did you know my sister and her husband moved in with my parents? Jessica nodded. Financial trouble from what I hear. Eric lost his job 6 months ago and Amanda's boutique is barely staying afloat. But that's not all. She lowered her voice. Your father's business has been struggling too. There are rumors about bad investments and cash flow problems. Amanda's been telling people that you abandoned the family when they needed you most. My stomach dropped. That's not true. They never asked for help. I didn't even know there were problems. Well, that's not the story circulating, Jessica said grimly. According to Amanda, you refused to share your wealth with your struggling family because you're bitter about your condition. Her words, not mine. I felt like I'd been punched. That's ridiculous. If they needed help, all they had to do was ask. There's more, Jessica continued hesitantly. I've heard Amanda talking about your parents' will. She's been pushing them to change it, arguing that since you don't have children, you don't need an inheritance to pass down. A waiter announced that dinner would be served, soon cutting our conversation short. As I made my way to the assigned seating, I noticed I'd been placed at a table, far from the main family table, where my parents Amanda and Eric sat with close friends and important business associates. My table companions were distant relatives and acquaintances who spent the first course peppering me with invasive questions. Is it true you haven't spoken to your father in 8 years? Amanda says you refused to help when Eric lost his job. Is that right? Your mother mentioned you can't have children. Have you considered those new treatments? Each question felt like another small cut. I answered as politely as possible while scanning the room, trying to make sense of the hostile reception. I caught Eric watching me several times, an unreadable expression on his face. When our eyes met, he quickly looked away. As the main course was served, I overheard a snippet of conversation from a nearby table. Robert's planning to make some kind of announcement tonight. Something about the family legacy. I watched my father laughing with Amanda, his arm around her shoulders, while my mother beamed at them both. They looked like the perfect family, complete without me. The weight of my absence from the family photos suddenly made sense. I wasn't just missing from the display, I had been deliberately erased. The dinner plates were cleared, and the soft clinking of silverware against china was replaced by the tap of a microphone. My father stood at the head table, champagne glass in hand, commanding the attention of the room. Thank you all for coming to celebrate this milestone with me, he began, his voice strong and confident. 60 years is a long time, but what makes those years meaningful is family. I leaned forward, hoping for some acknowledgement, some sign that my presence mattered. I've been blessed with a loving wife who has stood by me for 35 incredible years, he continued, raising his glass to my mother. And a daughter who exemplifies everything I value: loyalty, dedication to family, and respect for tradition. My heart skipped a beat until I realized he was looking directly at Amanda, who beamed back at him. There was no mention of a second daughter, no acknowledgement of my existence, despite sitting 20 feet away from him. Amanda and Eric have been a tremendous support, especially during some recent business challenges my father went on. They represent the future of this family, and hopefully soon they'll bless us with grandchildren to carry on the Wilson name. At this, my mother practically glowed with anticipation, reaching over to squeeze Amanda's hand. Any day now, she said into the microphone, drawing knowing laughs from the crowd. The fact that Amanda wasn't even pregnant didn't seem to matter the expectation and celebration of potential grandchildren, a stark contrast to the disgust they showed toward my own struggles with fertility. After the speech, as guests mingled and the band began playing, I approached the family table with renewed determination. This was supposed to be a reconciliation, and I wouldn't let their cold reception deter me. "Dad, I said you didn't open your gift earlier. I'd love for you to see it." My father glanced at me with mild annoyance, as if I were interrupting something important. "Now isn't a good time, Cassandra. We're discussing some family business." "It will just take a minute," I insisted, motioning to the gift table. "I found something special that reminded me of Grandpa." With a sigh, he followed me to the table. I handed him the package, watching expectantly as he unwrapped it with disinterest. The antique pocket watch gleamed in the light, its gold case engraved with an intricate design similar to the one his father had carried. "I tracked down a watchmaker who specializes in restoration," I explained eagerly. "It's the same model as Grandpa's that was lost in the move when I was 10. Remember how you always talked about how much you missed it?" My father examined the watch briefly before placing it back in its box. "Thoughtful," he said, without emotion, "but rather impractical. Who uses pocket watches these days?" He set the box aside without another glance and turned to rejoin the others. I stood there, the rejection stinging more than I wanted to admit. A moment later, Amanda approached, champagne glass in hand. "Nice try, sis. But Dad's got more important things on his mind than sentimental trinkets, like how to keep his business afloat while supporting me and Eric." "I didn't know about the business problems," I said honestly. "No one told me." She laughed, the sound brittle and cold. "Why would we? You made it clear years ago that you wanted nothing to do with this family. Now that Dad's struggling suddenly, you show up with gifts and expect everything to be forgiven." "That's not fair," I protested. "I was invited. Dad specifically asked me to come." "Please," Amanda scoffed. "Mom insisted on inviting you for appearance's sake. We have important business associates here. It would look bad if his eldest daughter was conspicuously absent." So this whole thing was just for show. The realization hurt more than I expected. "Wake up, Cassandra. It's always been for show with you. The perfect daughter who got away, built her fancy life, and doesn't care if her family struggles." She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "By the way, how much are you worth these days? That firm of yours pays well, doesn't it? And Thomas must be raking it in as a corporate attorney." The implication was clear. If Dad needed financial help, he could have asked me directly. His pride wouldn't allow it. Besides, why should he have to ask? A good daughter would offer without being prompted. She took another sip of champagne, watching me over the rim of her glass. "But then you've never been the good daughter, have you?" As Amanda walked away, I found myself face to face with my mother, who had apparently overheard part of our conversation. "You always had a talent for creating drama, Cassandra," she said with a tight smile. "Tonight is about celebrating your father, not rehashing old grievances." "I'm not trying to create drama. I defended myself. I just wanted to reconnect with my family." Reconnect. After 8 years of minimal contact, after rejecting every attempt we made to include you in family events, she adjusted her expensive necklace, a nervous habit she'd had for as long as I could remember. "You chose your path. You chose career over family, independence over tradition. You can't just waltz back in when it's convenient." "That's not what happened, Mom. You know that's not true." "What I know," she said, her voice hardening, "is that your sister has been here supporting your father through difficult times while you've been off playing career woman. Amanda understands family duty. She's put her own needs aside to help preserve the Wilson legacy." Before I could respond, I was interrupted by an old family friend, Mr. Reynolds, who had known my father since college. "Cassandra, good to see you after all this time. Your father must be thrilled to have both his daughters here tonight." My mother's expression tightened. "If you'll excuse us, George, I need to speak with the caterer about the cake." As she hurried away, Mr. Reynolds gave me a sympathetic look. "Tension's running high tonight, I see. Your father's been under a lot of pressure lately. The economic downturn hit his industry hard." "So I'm gathering," I replied, "though this is the first I'm hearing about it." He looked surprised. Really, I assumed you knew. The business has been struggling for a couple of years now. There was that failed expansion project, then the lawsuit from the Henderson development. Robert had to take out a second mortgage on the house just to make payroll last quarter. This information stunned me. The family home had been my grandmother's, passed down to my father with the understanding it would remain in the family for generations. It was where I'd grown up, where all my childhood memories were rooted. The thought of it being leveraged for business debts was unthinkable. I had no idea it was that serious, I admitted. Between us, Mr. Reynolds continued lowering his voice. I've heard Amanda's been pushing him to sell the house entirely. She and that husband of hers have their eye on a condo development downtown. More modern, less upkeep, and it would free up capital for Robert to invest in turning the business around. Sell my grandmother's house. The very idea felt like a violation. That house wasn't just property, it was our heritage, filled with generations of Wilson family history. It was the one place I'd always associated with stability and permanence, even after my relationship with my parents deteriorated. As the evening progressed, I observed Eric in deep conversation with several of my father's business associates. Unlike Amanda, who flitted from group to group playing the charming hostess, Eric seemed serious and focused. At one point, I saw him showing something on his phone to an older gentleman I recognized as my father's banker, both of them nodding with grave expressions. Jessica found me again near the dessert table. "Don't look now," she murmured, "but your family's having some kind of huddle by the gift table. They keep looking over at you." I glanced discreetly in that direction to see my father, mother, Amanda, and Eric in what appeared to be an intense discussion. As Jessica had said, they occasionally looked in my direction, their expressions ranging from my father's annoyance to Amanda's barely concealed hostility. "I think I'm about to find out what this evening is really about," I said, a sense of foreboding settling over me like a heavy cloak. The moment arrived with the ceremonial cutting of the birthday cake. My father stood before a three-tiered masterpiece decorated with fondant golf clubs and business motifs, a testament to his lifelong passions. The guests gathered around, smartphones raised to capture the moment. I lingered at the edge of the crowd, uncertain of my place in this family ritual. After the obligatory photos and the singing of Happy Birthday, my father cleared his throat and tapped his champagne glass for attention. The room quieted, all eyes on the man of the hour. "Before we enjoy this magnificent cake," he announced, "I'd like to take this opportunity to share some news with all of you, my closest friends and family." He paused, his gaze sweeping the room but carefully avoiding the corner where I stood. "As some of you know, recent years have brought challenges to both my business and our family. But challenges are opportunities for growth and clarity, for understanding what truly matters." My mother moved to stand beside him, followed by Amanda and Eric, forming a perfect family tableau that excluded me entirely. "Tonight, as I celebrate 60 years of life, I'm thinking about legacy, about what we leave behind for those who matter most." He put his arm around Amanda's shoulders. "I'm pleased to announce that I've made some important decisions about the future of the Wilson family and its assets." A hush fell over the crowd. I felt my heart rate quicken, Jessica's warning echoing in my mind. "I've updated my will," my father continued, his voice carrying clearly through the silent room. "The family home and the majority of my assets will pass to Amanda and Eric upon my death, or sooner if circumstances dictate." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the audience. Several people turned to look at me, expressions ranging from shock to pity to morbid curiosity. "This decision wasn't made lightly," my father added, "but it reflects where the true future of this family lies. Amanda and Eric have stood by us through difficult times. They understand the value of family, loyalty, and support, and God willing, they'll soon bring the next generation of Wilsons into the world." The implication was clear. My childless state made me unworthy of inheritance in his eyes. I felt a wave of heat rush to my face, humiliation and anger battling for dominance. "Dad," I said, my voice somehow steady despite the emotion churning inside me. "Could we discuss this privately, please?" All eyes turned to me. My father's expression hardened. "There's nothing to discuss, Cassandra. The decision has been made." "I think there is," I insisted, moving forward through the crowd. "Grandmother's house was meant to stay in the family. She was explicit about that in her will. And it will stay in the family, he countered, with Amanda, who actually values family traditions and connections. This isn't about family traditions, I said, struggling to keep my voice level. This is about money. You're using the house as a financial asset, which goes against everything grandmother wanted. A dangerous flush crept up my father's neck. How dare you question my decisions about my own property? It's not just your property, I pointed out. Grandmother left specific instructions about the house. It was meant to pass down through generations, not to be sold off when convenient. Enough. My father's voice boomed through the ballroom. You lost any right to an opinion about family matters when you chose to distance yourself from us, when you prioritized your career over family obligations, when you failed in the most basic duty of continuing the family line. Shocked silence fell over the room. I stood frozen, wounded by the cruelty of his words, but determined not to show it. That's unfair, I finally managed. My medical condition isn't a choice or a failure. Your condition is just an excuse, my mother interjected. There are treatments options. You simply didn't try hard enough because children would interfere with your precious career. I had 2 miscarriages, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. We tried everything the doctors recommended. Not everything, Amanda chimed in with a smirk. Some women are just meant to nurture families. Others, well, nature has a way of selecting who should pass on their genes. The casual cruelty of her statement stunned me. Is that what this is about? You think I don't deserve an inheritance because I can't have children? This is about who's committed to this family, my father retorted. Who will carry on the Wilson name and legacy? I am a Wilson, I insisted, moving closer to him. Just because I don't live my life according to your expectations doesn't make me any less your daughter. What happened next occurred so quickly I barely had time to register it. My father's face contorted with rage, his hand shot out, and the sharp crack of his palm against my cheek echoed through the stunned ballroom. The force of the slap sent me stumbling backward, my hand flying to my burning face in shock. 88 people witnessed my father strike me. 88 people saw me physically assaulted at what was supposed to be a celebration. 88 people heard the gasp that escaped my lips and saw the tears that immediately sprang to my eyes. But the worst was yet to come. Amanda burst into applause, actually clapping her hands with glee at my humiliation. That's right, Dad, put her in her place. She turned to address the shocked crowd. Give us the house, you've no kids. What would you even do with it? Who would you pass it to? Your cats. My mother's laughter joined. Amanda's a high, brittle sound that cut through the uncomfortable silence that had fallen over the other guests. You're just a barren waste of Wilson DNA, she added, the venom in her voice unmistakable. At least Amanda understands her duty to the family. I stood there, one hand pressed to my burning cheek, feeling as though the floor might open up and swallow me whole. The room seemed to spin slightly, faces blurring around me as the full impact of what had just happened sank in. My own father had physically struck me. My sister had cheered. My mother had laughed. All in front of dozens of witnesses who now stood in uncomfortable silence, unwilling to intervene in what was clearly a family implosion. The pain of the slap was nothing compared to the emotional wound inflicted by their coordinated attack. This hadn't been a spontaneous outburst, I realized with growing clarity. This had been planned perhaps from the moment they sent the invitation. A public humiliation designed to put me firmly in my place and justify my disinheritance to their social circle. Through the haze of shock and pain, I noticed Eric shifting uncomfortably beside Amanda, his expression troubled as he stared at the floor, refusing to meet anyone's eyes. Several guests began to murmur to each other, and a few even headed for the exits, unwilling to be associated with such an ugly scene. Robert, that was completely unnecessary, said an elderly man I recognized as my father's former business partner. Violence is never acceptable, especially against your own daughter. Stay out of this, Harold, my father snapped. This is a family matter. A family matter you've chosen to make public, Harold countered, moving to stand beside me. Are you all right, my dear? Before I could answer, Amanda stepped forward, positioning herself between us. Oh, please, it was barely a tap. Cassandra's always been dramatic. She'll probably use this to play victim for another 8 years of absence. I found my voice at last, though it shook slightly. I came here tonight hoping to reconcile. I thought the invitation meant you wanted to heal our relationship. I see now that was never the intention. Reconcile, my father scoffed. What's there to reconcile? You made your choices long ago, Cassandra. You chose your path and now you're facing the consequences. The consequence of not being able to have children is being disowned. Being physically assaulted at a birthday party, I asked, my voice growing stronger with indignation. Is that really the kind of father you want to be remembered as? Don't you dare question my legacy, he growled, taking a step toward me before my mother placed a restraining hand on his arm. Not here, Robert, she murmured. People are watching. Always concerned with appearances, never with the actual harm being inflicted. That was my mother in a nutshell. I straightened my spine, wiped the tears from my eyes, and looked directly at each member of my family in turn. Thank you for making your feelings so abundantly clear. I won't trouble any of you with my presence again. As I turned to leave, Amanda called after me. Don't forget to send a check for Dad's birthday. It's the least you can do since you've contributed nothing else to this family. I walked steadily through the parting crowd, head held high, despite the burning humiliation coursing through me. As I reached the door, I heard Eric's voice behind me. Cassandra, wait. I paused, turning to see him hurrying after me, concern evident on his face. I'm sorry, he said quietly. That shouldn't have happened. None of this should have happened. Yet you stood there and let it happen, I replied too, drained to summon real anger at him. You're part of this family now, Eric. You've made your choice. He glanced back toward Amanda, who was watching us with narrowed eyes. It's complicated. There are things you don't know. Then enlighten me. He hesitated, then shook his head. I can't. Not here. Just be careful. Okay, this isn't over. With those cryptic words, he returned to my sister's side, leaving me to walk alone to my car in the cool night air, my cheeks still stinging from my father's hand and my heart heavy with the knowledge that some family wounds can never truly heal. The drive back to my hotel was a blur. My hands trembled on the steering wheel as I navigated through the quiet streets, my mind replaying the humiliating scene over and over. By the time I reached the safety of my room, shock had given way to a strange, calm clarity. I sat on the edge of the bed and pulled out my phone. It was just past midnight in Boston, which meant it was 5 in the morning in London. Thomas would be awake, preparing for his early court appearance. He answered on the second ring. Cass, how did it go? His voice, warm and concerned, was like a lifeline pulling me back from the edge of despair. Not well, I managed, my voice catching. Actually, that's an understatement. It was a disaster. I recounted the evening's events, from the cold reception to the public announcement, and the shocking slap that still left my cheek burning with humiliation. Thomas listened without interrupting, though I could hear his breathing change as my story unfolded, growing more controlled in the way it did when he was deeply angry but trying to remain professional. He hit you, he finally said, his voice dangerously quiet. In front of everyone? Yes. And Amanda cheered. She actually clapped and cheered Thomas. My own sister. That's assault. We could press charges, he said, the attorney in him, immediately identifying the legal implications. I don't want to press charges against my father, I sighed. What I want is to understand how things got this bad, and why they're so desperate to cut me out completely. Thomas was silent for a moment. This isn't just about old family grievances or your inability to have children. There's something else going on. The house, the changes to the will, Eric's warning, the financial troubles with the business. It all points to something bigger. His words triggered a memory, something that had been nagging at the back of my mind. Wait, there's something else. Years ago, before we were married, when I was still occasionally helping Dad with the business bookkeeping, I found some discrepancies. Dad brushed it off as accounting errors, but I always suspected there was more to it. What kind of discrepancies? Thomas asked, his voice sharpening with professional interest. transfers to accounts I didn't recognize, signatures on documents that didn't quite match. I actually found a document with what looked like my signature on it, but I had never signed it. I paused, thinking back. When I confronted Dad, he got angry, said I was being paranoid and that I should trust him to handle the business he'd built long before I got my fancy finance degree. Cassandra Thomas said slowly, "That sounds like potential forgery. If your father used your name or signature without authorization, you think he might have been using my identity for some of his business dealings." The thought was both shocking and sadly plausible. It's possible. And if those dealings weren't entirely above board, it would explain the desperation to keep you at a distance. It would also explain why they're so focused on the house. If the business is failing, that property might be their last significant asset. I rubbed my temples, feeling a headache building. But the house was my grandmother's. Her will was specific about it staying in the family for generations. Dad can't just sell it. There was a pause on the line. "Cass, do you have a copy of your grandmother's will?" No, it was all handled by Dad's attorney after she passed. I was only 22 at the time, finishing my degree. I trusted Dad to handle it properly. "I think we need to see that will," Thomas said decisively. "If your grandmother's intentions for the house were as specific as you remember, there may be legal protections in place that your father can't override regardless of what his new will states." The beginnings of a plan started to form in my mind. I need to make some calls. Starting with Jessica, she might have connections at the county clerk's office. And I should talk to Harold, Dad's former business partner who tried to stand up for me tonight. Good thinking. And Cass, don't confront your family again without support. What happened tonight crosses a line. This isn't just about hurt feelings anymore. It's potentially about fraud. After ending the call with Thomas, I lay back on the hotel bed, my mind racing. The public humiliation still stung, but it was being rapidly overshadowed by the growing suspicion that something truly corrupt was happening within my family. I made my second call of the night to Jessica, who answered groggily but became fully alert as I explained what had happened after she left the party. "He hit you in front of everyone. Cass, that's assault." "That's what Thomas said, but pressing charges isn't my priority right now. I need information, Jess. You mentioned knowing someone at the county records office." "My cousin Diane, yes. She's worked there for years. What are you looking for?" "I need to see my grandmother's will, the original document, not whatever version my father might have presented. And I need to know if there have been any recent property transactions or liens involving the family home." Jessica was silent for a moment. "You think your dad might have done something illegal with the house?" "I don't know, but I intend to find out." After arranging to meet Jessica and her cousin the next morning, I made my third call of the night, the one that would ultimately change everything. Harold Reynolds, my father's former business partner, had given me his card years ago, with instructions to call if I ever needed anything. I'd kept it all this time through multiple wallet changes and phone upgrades, transferring the contact information faithfully each time. He answered on the fourth ring, his voice gruff with sleep. "Harold Reynolds." "Mr. Reynolds, it's Cassandra Wilson, Robert's daughter. I apologize for calling so late." "Cassandra, are you all right? That was quite a scene earlier." "I'm fine, Mr. Reynolds, but I need to ask you some questions about my father's business dealings, particularly from about 10 years ago." There was a long pause. "You'd better come by my house tomorrow morning, 7:30, before I head to the golf course. Some things shouldn't be discussed over the phone." That night, I barely slept. Instead, I used my financial analyst skills to dig into whatever public records I could access online regarding Wilson, construction, and my father's other business interests. What I found was troubling. The company had been declining steadily for years, with several projects ending in litigation and settlements that must have cost a fortune. There were also some questionable property transactions and business loans that made little sense from a financial perspective. By morning, I had a clearer picture of the mess my father had created, though many pieces were still missing. I dressed carefully in a professional outfit armor of a sort for the battle ahead, and drove to Harold Reynolds' impressive lakeside home. He greeted me with a grim expression and led me to his home office without small talk. Once we were seated with coffee, he got straight to the point. I've been waiting for this conversation for years, though. I never expected it to come after such an ugly incident. Your father crossed a line last night that can't be uncrossed. What can you tell me about his business practices, particularly anything involving my name or signature? Harold sighed heavily. I suspected as much. About 8 years ago, around the time you and your father had your falling out, I discovered some irregularities in how certain projects were being financed. Your father had created a subsidiary company that was being used to secure loans and circumvent certain regulatory requirements. The paperwork listed you as a partner and co-signer. My blood ran cold. I never signed anything like that. I didn't think you had. When I confronted Robert, he claimed you had agreed to it before your estrangement, but the timing didn't add up. That's when I dissolved our partnership. I couldn't be associated with what looked like fraud, even if it was being perpetrated by a man I'd considered a friend for 30 years. Do you have copies of any of those documents? I asked, my heart racing. Harold nodded and moved to a filing cabinet in the corner. I kept everything. Call it insurance, or perhaps just the caution of an old businessman who's seen too many former partners end up in legal trouble. He handed me a thick folder. It's all here. Loan applications, incorporation documents, tax filings, all with what purports to be your signature. If these were executed without your knowledge or consent, it's forgery and fraud, plain and simple. I opened the folder with trembling hands. There, on document after document, was a reasonable facsimile of my signature authorizing loans, establishing joint liability, and creating business entities I'd never heard of. The implications were staggering. If these companies failed or the loans defaulted, I could be held personally liable for millions of dollars in debt. Does Amanda know about this? I asked, thinking of my sister's hostile behavior. I doubt she knew initially, but given her current involvement in the business, she may have discovered it recently. That might explain the urgency to legally distance you from family assets through the new will. If these fraudulent arrangements come to light, creditors could potentially go after any assets in which you have an interest, including your grandmother's house. The pieces were falling into place. My father's business was failing. He had committed fraud using my identity years ago. Now, as creditors were closing in, he and Amanda were trying to ensure that the family home, potentially my grandmother's most valuable legacy, couldn't be touched by moving it firmly out of my reach. I need to see my grandmother's will, I said more to myself than to Harold. If she left specific instructions about the house? She did, Harold confirmed, surprising me. Eleanor was my friend too, remember. She was very clear that the house should pass to her grandchildren equally, and should remain in the family for at least 3 generations. Robert was merely the trustee, not the outright owner. This revelation changed everything. If what Harold said was true, my father had no legal right to sell the house or transfer it solely to Amanda. Moreover, as a grandchild of Eleanor Wilson, I had a legal claim that couldn't be erased by my father's new will. I spent the rest of the day building my case. Jessica's cousin provided copies of the original will and property records confirming Harold's recollection. The house was indeed held in a family trust, with specific provisions preventing its sale, without the unanimous consent of all beneficiaries, which included me. I hired a local private investigator recommended by Thomas to gather additional information about the current state of my father's businesses and Amanda's involvement. By evening, I had a clearer picture of just how desperate their financial situation had become. With Thomas's guidance via phone, I consulted with a local attorney specializing in estate law and fraud cases. We prepared the necessary legal documents to protect my interests and address the fraudulent use of my identity. The attorney was confident that with the evidence we'd gathered, we could not only prevent the sale or transfer of the house, but also potentially seek damages for the years of fraud perpetrated in my name. As night fell, I made one final call to Eric, my brother-in-law, who had shown a glimmer of conscience at the party. After some initial reluctance, he agreed to meet me privately at a coffee shop the following morning. I can't promise I'll tell you anything, he warned. My loyalty has to be to Amanda. I understand, I replied. but I think you should know what you're being loyal to before you make that decision. With my case built and my strategy in place, I returned to my hotel room and slept soundly for the first time since arriving in town. The public humiliation my family had inflicted still hurt, but it had also freed me from any lingering illusions about reconciliation. Now, I wasn't fighting for my place in a toxic family dynamic, but for justice and the protection of my grandmother's legacy. The quiet call I'd made to Harold Reynolds had set everything in motion. Now it was time to face my family with the truth backed by legal authority and irrefutable evidence. They had thought me weak and isolated. They were about to discover just how wrong they had been. 1 week after the disastrous birthday party, I returned to my childhood home. This time I wasn't alone. Thomas had flown back from London immediately after concluding his case. Jessica was by my side, and we were accompanied by Harold Reynolds and Brian Hoffman, the attorney specializing in estate fraud. We had called ahead, informing my parents that we needed to discuss urgent family business and giving them no opportunity to refuse the meeting. As our small procession of cars pulled into the circular driveway of the stately colonial home where I'd grown up, I felt a strange mix of emotions. This place held so many memories, both good and painful. Now it represented something else. Entirely the tangible evidence of my grandmother's wishes and my rightful heritage. My mother opened the door before we could ring the bell, her expression a mixture of annoyance and poorly concealed anxiety. "Cassandra, what is the meaning of this? Who are all these people?" "They're with me, Mom. We need to talk. All of us. Is Dad home? And Amanda and Eric?" "Your father is in his study. Amanda and Eric are in the kitchen." Her eyes narrowed as she recognized Harold. "Harold Reynolds. I didn't expect to see you darkening our doorway again." Sarah Harold acknowledged with a curt nod. Some circumstances transcend old disagreements. We moved into the formal living room, a space rarely used, except for special occasions, its elegant furniture and crystal knickknacks preserved like museum pieces. My mother reluctantly went to fetch the others, her posture stiff with indignation. My father entered first, his face darkening when he saw our assembled group. "What is this? Some kind of ambush? Harold, what the hell are you doing in my house?" Before anyone could respond, Amanda swept in with Eric trailing behind her. She froze when she saw me, then quickly composed her features into a sneer. "Back for more, didn't get enough humiliation the first time around." "Everyone, please sit down," I said calmly, refusing to be baited. "This concerns all of you, and it's in everyone's best interest to hear us out." "I don't have to listen to anything you have to say," my father blustered, though he remained standing rather than walking out. "Actually, Robert, you do," Harold interjected, "unless you'd prefer these discussions to take place in a courtroom or potentially before a grand jury." That got their attention. My father's face paled slightly, and he sank into his favorite armchair. My mother perched on the edge of the sofa while Amanda and Eric took the love seat across from us. Thomas stood supportively behind my chair, a solid presence that gave me strength. "Let me introduce Brian Hoffman," I began, gesturing to the attorney. "He specializes in estate fraud and identity theft. Over the past week, we've gathered extensive documentation regarding several concerning matters that affect this family." "This is ridiculous," Amanda cut in. "If you're trying to contest Dad's decision about the will, you're wasting your time. He has every right to leave his property to whoever he chooses." "That's partially correct," Brian said, speaking for the first time. "Robert Wilson does have discretion over his personal assets. However, he continued opening his briefcase, and removing a thick folder the family home is not, legally speaking, his personal asset to dispose of, as he wishes." "What are you talking about?" my father demanded. "Of course it's my house. I've lived here for 35 years. "Living in a property doesn't necessarily establish ownership," Brian explained. "According to Eleanor Wilson's will, which we've obtained from county records, this house was placed in a family trust with specific instructions for its preservation and inheritance. You, Robert, were named as trustee, not sole owner. The beneficiaries are explicitly listed as my grandchildren equally shared, with provisions preventing sale or transfer without unanimous consent of all beneficiaries for 3 generations." My mother's hand flew to her throat. That's absurd. Eleanor would never have tied Robert's hands that way. But she did, Harold confirmed. I was there when she had the will drawn up. Eleanor was very clear about her intentions for the family home. She wanted it preserved for future generations of Wilsons, not used as a financial asset. This is ancient history my father dismissed, though, with less conviction than before. That will was executed decades ago. And remains legally binding, Brian countered. No subsequent documents have invalidated those provisions, which means, Mr. Wilson, that your recent attempts to transfer the property solely to Amanda or to leverage it for business purposes are in direct violation of the trust's terms. Amanda leapt to her feet. This is just spite. You can't stand that Dad recognizes me as the only real daughter he has left, the only one who might give him grandchildren. This has nothing to do with spite, Amanda, I said quietly. This is about legal rights and frankly about fraud. Fraud, Eric spoke for the first time, looking alarmed. What fraud? Thomas stepped forward, placing additional documents on the coffee table. We've uncovered extensive evidence that Robert Wilson has been using Cassandra's identity without her knowledge or consent for business purposes for approximately 10 years. This includes forged signatures on loan documents, incorporation papers, and various financial instruments. My father's face had gone from pale to ashen. That's a lie. Cassandra agreed to help with the business years ago. Did I agree to co-sign for a $3 million loan in 2016? I asked, pointing to one of the documents. Or to serve as guarantor for the Riverside Development Project in 2018? I was living in Boston then, Dad. I hadn't spoken to you in years. How could I have agreed to any of this? You've always been ungrateful, he muttered, but the fight was leaving his voice. Robert, Harold said gravely, I left our partnership because I suspected you were engaging in fraudulent practices. I didn't go to the authorities then out of respect for our friendship, but I kept copies of everything. There's no denying what you've done. You did what my mother turned to my father, genuine shock on her face. You forged our daughter's signature, used her name without permission. It wasn't like that, Sarah, my father protested weakly. The business was struggling. I needed the loans, but my credit was maxed out. Cassandra had excellent credit and no debt. It was just paperwork, a formality. I never thought it would matter. It matters, Brian stated firmly. Identity theft and forgery are serious crimes, Mr. Wilson. The financial institutions involved would have a strong case against you, potentially resulting in criminal charges. Amanda, who had been uncharacteristically quiet during these revelations, suddenly rounded on Eric. You knew about this, didn't you? That's why you've been so weird lately, always closing your laptop when I come into the room taking calls outside. Eric looked miserable. I found some of the documents when I was helping your dad with the refinancing application last month. I told him we needed to come clean, find a legitimate way to restructure the debt. And I was working on it, my father insisted. That's why we needed to clarify the will, get the house properly transferred to Amanda. With the house as collateral, we could secure new financing and pay off the old debts. Using my name, I said softly, leaving me holding the bag if anything went wrong. Again, you weren't using it, Amanda snapped. You were off living your perfect childless life in Boston while we were here trying to save the family business. By committing fraud, Thomas interjected, his tone sharp. By planning to sell a house that isn't yours to sell. By publicly humiliating Cassandra when she did nothing wrong. An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. Finally, my mother spoke, her voice uncharacteristically subdued. What happens now? Are you going to press charges? I exchanged glances with Thomas and Brian before answering. That depends on what happens in this room today. We're prepared to offer a solution that keeps this matter private and potentially avoids criminal proceedings. What kind of solution? My father asked warily. First, a formal acknowledgement of the trust provisions regarding the house with legal documentation, confirming that it cannot be sold or transferred without my consent as a beneficiary, I began. Second, a complete accounting of all instances where my identity was used with a structured plan to remove my name from any fraudulent agreements and assume full responsibility for those debts. That could bankrupt us, my father protested. as opposed to what prison for fraud Thomas countered. This is an extremely generous offer given the circumstances. Third, I continued family counseling. All of us. The behavior at Dad's birthday party was inexcusable and revealed deep dysfunction that needs to be addressed if we're ever to have any kind of relationship moving forward. Counseling, that's your big demand, Amanda scoffed. That we all sit around talking about our feelings. It's not a demand, it's an opportunity, I corrected her. An opportunity to heal what's broken instead of continuing to destroy each other. And what about the business, my father asked. Without the house as collateral, we're finished. Not necessarily, Thomas said. Part of our proposal includes a legitimate business restructuring plan. Cassandra and I are prepared to invest in the company properly and legally, this time in exchange for equity and oversight of financial operations. The offer hung in the air. My father looked stunned clearly, having expected vengeful demands rather than a path forward. My mother was watching him carefully, her expression unreadable. Eric seemed relieved while Amanda looked conflicted, anger warring with a grudging recognition of the lifeline being offered. Why would you help us? After what happened, my father finally asked, genuine confusion in his voice. I took a deep breath, searching for the right words. Because despite everything, you're still my family. And because grandmother believed this house, this legacy was meant for all of us. She wanted it to unite the family, not divide it. I need time to think, my father said, running a hand through his silver hair, to discuss this with Sarah and Amanda. Of course, I agreed. But not too much time. The documentation we've gathered has been secured with our attorney. If we don't reach an agreement within 3 days, we'll have no choice but to proceed with legal action. As the meeting broke up, Amanda approached me while the others were gathering their things. Her usual confidence was absent, replaced by an uncertainty I'd rarely seen in my typically brazen sister. I didn't know about the forgery, she said quietly. I swear, Cass. I knew the business was in trouble, but not that Dad had used your name. Would it have mattered? I asked honestly. You seemed pretty comfortable with the idea of cutting me out completely. She had the grace to look ashamed. I've been jealous of you for as long as I can remember. You were always the smart one, the successful one. Even when you left, you cast this shadow I could never escape. Dad was always comparing me to you, even while criticizing you for leaving. I never wanted to cast a shadow, Amanda. I just wanted to live my own life. I know that now. She hesitated, then added, for what it's worth, I'm sorry about what I said at the party, about you not having kids. That was cruel. It wasn't a full apology, but it was something, a small crack in the wall of hostility that had stood between us for so long. As we left the house that day, I felt a cautious hope that perhaps, just perhaps, there might be a path forward for this broken family after all. 6 months passed each day, bringing small but significant changes to the landscape of our family relationships. The legal agreements were signed within the 3-day window I'd offered, with my father acknowledging both his fraudulent actions and the true ownership structure of the family home. The process of untangling the business debt began with Thomas and I, providing legitimate investment under clearly documented terms. The most challenging aspect of our agreement, perhaps unsurprisingly, was the family counseling. Those first few sessions were tense affairs filled with defensive posturing and old accusations. Our therapist, Dr. Martinez, had her work cut out for her as decades of resentment and miscommunication surfaced. But gradually, week by week, something remarkable began to happen. We started to actually listen to each other. My father, stripped of his patriarchal authority and forced to confront the consequences of his actions, initially retreated into a shell of bitter silence. But by the 3rd month, he began to speak about his own father's emotional distance, the crushing pressure he'd felt to succeed at any cost, and the fear of failure that had driven him to increasingly desperate measures. I never knew how to be any different, he admitted during one particularly emotional session. My father measured love in achievements and possessions. I did the same to you, Cassandra. And when you rejected that measure, I didn't know how to reach you anymore. For her part, my mother slowly revealed the insecurities that had fueled her obsession with appearances and social standing. Her own mother had abandoned the family when Sarah was just 12, leaving her to believe that a woman's worth was tied to her ability to maintain a perfect family image. When you chose career over traditional family life, she told me, tears in her eyes. It felt like you were saying, our way of life, my choices weren't good enough. I took it as a personal rejection. Amanda's journey was perhaps the most dramatic. With the pressure to be the good daughter removed, she began to explore her own authentic desires and talents. She and Eric moved out of my parents' home into a modest apartment, and Amanda closed her struggling boutique to return to school, pursuing the architecture degree she'd abandoned years ago to please our father. I always wanted to design buildings, she confessed to me over coffee one day, but Dad said fashion was more appropriate for a Wilson woman. He said construction was men's work. As for me, the process of forgiveness didn't come easily. The memory of that public slap and humiliation occasionally resurfaces a phantom sting on my cheek. But with time and the guidance of both our family therapist and my own individual counselor, I've come to understand that holding on to anger only prolonged my own suffering. The most unexpected joy came 3 months into our healing journey, when Thomas and I finalized the adoption of a beautiful 4-year-old girl named Lily. Her entrance into our lives brought a dimension of love I hadn't known was possible. My mother, to my surprise, transformed almost overnight into a doting grandmother, showering Lily with attention and affection. I was wrong about what makes a family, she told me as we watched Lily playing in the garden of the family home during our first visit back. So terribly wrong. Today marks a significant milestone in our journey. We've gathered at the family home not for a formal occasion like my father's birthday, but for a simple Sunday lunch. The atmosphere couldn't be more different from that fateful night 6 months ago. My father, more relaxed than I've seen him in decades, is teaching Lily how to play checkers in the sunroom. My mother and Amanda are in the kitchen preparing salad and laughing over some shared joke. Eric and Thomas are discussing a legal question related to Eric's new small business venture, their heads bent together over a document. As I watch this scene of domestic tranquility, so ordinary yet so miraculous given where we were just months ago, I reflect on the lessons this painful journey has taught me. First, that standing up for yourself isn't about revenge or punishment, but about establishing truth and boundaries. When I confronted my family with evidence of wrongdoing, my goal wasn't to destroy them, but to clear a path for honest interaction. Second, that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or excusing harmful behavior. It means releasing the burden of resentment that weighs primarily on the one carrying it. I haven't forgotten the humiliation of that night, but I've chosen not to let it define my relationship with my family moving forward. Third, and perhaps most importantly, that family isn't defined by blood alone or by shared DNA passed to future generations. It's defined by respect, by mutual support, by the willingness to see each other as flawed but valuable human beings worthy of love. Thomas and I may not have biological children, but in Lily, we've found a daughter to cherish. And in the healing of my birth family, we've reclaimed connections that enrich all our lives. My father approaches Lily, skipping alongside him, holding his hand, a sight I couldn't have imagined half a year ago. "Lunch is almost ready," he says, his voice gentler than it used to be. "Your mother wants everyone at the table." As I rise to join the others, he hesitates, then adds, "I'm proud of you, Cassandra. Not for your job or your house or any of that. I'm proud of the person you are. The way you handled all of this with strength and compassion. I didn't deserve that second chance." "Maybe none of us deserve second chances," I reply, watching Lily run ahead to the dining room, "but I'm grateful we get them anyway." Around the table, as we pass dishes and share stories, I see not the perfect family I once longed for, but something more valuable, a real family with acknowledged flaws and genuine efforts to do better. The house around us, my grandmother's legacy, stands as a testament not to wealth or status, but to the possibility of healing across generations. Sometimes the deepest wounds come from those who should love us most. But in confronting those wounds with courage and integrity, we create the possibility of genuine connection. Not every family story has a happy ending, and reconciliation isn't always possible or even healthy. But in our case, one quiet call set in motion a journey from public humiliation to private healing, from broken trust to cautious rebuilding. Have you ever had to stand up to family members who hurt you? What helped you find the strength to set boundaries while keeping the door open to healing? Share your experiences in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that family wounds, even the deepest ones, don't have to be the end of the story. Thank you for listening, and remember that your worth isn't determined by how others treat you, but by the courage and compassion with which you navigate life's most challenging relationships.